Welcome to This Club Sucks. Grief support for parents after the lasagnas are long gone. I am your host, Melissa Monroe, here with my co-host, Alexandria Seamock. Each week, we record our child loss chat on Twitter Spaces, where we explore topics around grief and trauma. Whether you are a bereaved parent, want to support bereaved parents, or exploring other sources of grief, we'll be here holding space after the lasagnas are long gone.
Oh, this club sucks.
Welcome to Child Loss Chat on Twitter Spaces, which I record for my podcast, This Club Sucks, grief support for parents after the lasagnas are long gone. Today, we welcome Stephanie Herrman, who has a master's in theology and has been a long-time bodyworker, Pilates teacher, business owner, and we ran our businesses together for many years. She's a wonderful person, and I'm happy to have her. Recently, Stephanie did an internship or a residency, I guess it is, at Children's Hospital, Los Angeles, where she worked with children who were near the end, which is really important and devastating work. And in some of our conversations that we've had throughout our friendship, and after my daughter died in 2013, it became clear that in times of tragedy, any kind of tragedy, not just child loss, people tend to either go deeper into their beliefs and really cling to them, which is great, fine. There's no judgment on anything we discuss here, by the way, today. And judgment will not be tolerated. This will be a non-denominational space and a safe space to talk about what happens to our beliefs after a tragedy. And not just religious beliefs or spiritual beliefs. A tragedy can throw all of your beliefs. You start to not trust gravity, really. So people can go one of a few ways. Some of them go deeper into whatever their chosen faith is. Some people switch faiths. Some people who never had a faith become interested in that. And some people who have always had a faith start to really question it. And a lot of times, particularly if you were raised in a certain faith, in my experience in working with so many families, that creates a lot of shame and guilt and a lot of other negative emotions, which I think just make the grieving process farther. So I was really hoping, and now it's happened, that I can have a discussion with Stephanie about when you have a crisis in faith after a tragedy. I think when you're questioning reality, it's bound to come up for some people. And I just really wanted to have a safe space to talk about it. And with that, I will let Stephanie Herrman introduce herself.
Hello, my name is Stephanie Herrman. And as Melissa mentioned, I recently completed a master's in theology. That is part of my process is working towards ordained ministry in the Episcopal Church. And I just wanted to give that little bit of background. I will try to be as multi-faith and as unspecific to my faith background as possible. Not only because I know that speaking from my own background can make it a little incongruent, a little off for people of different faith backgrounds, but also that I know that a lot of just language can be triggering for people, especially if you're not in the best position with your faith at the moment. And as Melissa mentioned, I did do actually an internship at Children's Hospital Los Angeles in the summer of 2021. And that was largely inspired by my experience with the loss of Melissa's daughter. And I can't remember how much of this story I've told to Melissa, but I regularly attended at that time on Wednesday afternoons a healing service, a midweek service that was specifically dedicated to healing prayer. And I heard the news. I got the phone call relating that Alice had passed while I was about to walk into church. And for me, that was the best place I could be at that moment. But I know that's not an experience that other people had. And one of the things that Melissa and I have talked about and was true in my experience of a children's hospital was trauma can send people usually in two directions. And it's usually people either cling to their faith as a lifeline or it becomes a pretty traumatic break. And so there's these different reactions, and they're very human reactions. And I place no moral or value judgments on any of that. It just tends to be what I saw in that situation.
Yeah, thank you for that, Stephanie. So I wanted to jump right in. What happens when someone is having a crisis in faith? And one of the things that we've discussed, and I think it's a really important distinction, is the difference between a crisis in faith and a crisis in belief. And I wondered if you wanted to talk about that for a moment.
Sure, definitely. And I think it's a really important distinction. I think that a lot of people, when they say they're having a crisis of faith, are actually talking about a crisis of belief, meaning that you have a set model of the world, a set idea of how you relate to the divine or the greater world around you. And for those of you who were raised in a faith tradition, that can have some really specific rules and guidelines and structures about what you believe. And so when a trauma comes, that belief system can be completely shaken. And so if you have a way of defining like what you believe, in those times, it can be really a great upheaval. And it's not a negative upheaval. I think that a lot of what I do in my current works is we talk about having an adult faith. So it's a faith that you have questioned, you have analyzed, you have measured against your own experience, that you haven't just accepted the faith that most of us learn as children. But at some point, which happens for a lot of people in their early teenage years, they say, I don't believe any of this, or I don't believe this aspect of what I'm hearing in a religious setting. And they either leave the church or they find a new church or a new synagogue or a new mosque, or they start to analyze and they start maybe to read different things, explore different religious aspects, different congregations. They might go looking, or in my own case, I took a 20 plus year break from the church. And it was because I had encountered my dad had suddenly gone hardcore fundamentalist. And that was not the way that we were raised. And I was like, I'm out. If that's what religion is, then I want nothing to do with it. And I didn't return to religion for decades. But that was a crisis of belief for me, as opposed to a crisis of faith, what I would consider a real crisis of faith, which goes beyond like rejecting a certain theology or a certain of how you relate to the divine, as opposed to your personal experience. Again, I apologize if this language is off-putting, and I will clarify if I can, but I would say that a crisis of faith is feeling disconnected from the divine. Or if you have very general terms, if you feel disconnected from the universe, if you feel this sort of that you are no longer sort of companioned in your life, if you feel no longer supported by the greater world around you, whether you define that as a nebulous universe or a theology or a sort of ideal of beauty or how things should be, or if you actually relate that to a specific God, it's the absence of that relationship. So I would say that in a real crisis of faith, that you have lost faith in that relationship as opposed to a belief system. So hopefully that makes sense. And if you have a question that maybe can help me clarify it, feel free to ask.
Yes, and anyone that wanted to ask a question, go ahead, and Dr. A will make all the magic happen. In the meantime, Dr. A has a question.
I wondered if you could just repeat that last part again about feeling like disconnected from the world around you or not supported, Stephanie.
I will do my best. Again, I'm relating my specific experience, which I know a lot of people have different experiences. So in my experience, as I said, I left the church for a very long time, but I never lost that feeling of having divine love and divine support in my life. I have, from a young age, felt connected to the divine. For me, very specifically, in the Christian religion, we have, it's called a trifold God, or a Trinitarian God, where we believe in God and Jesus and the Holy Spirit. And for me, the way that I connect most into that is through the Holy Spirit. Quite frankly, I blame the Star Wars trilogy for that. My understanding of the Holy Spirit has always felt similar to the Force, but it is in a sense in my life of a energy giving, supporting, sustaining love that sort of undergirds everything. And again, this is specific to me and my understanding, but I have never felt the absence of that love. I have always felt that sort of steady knowledge that there is some purpose that is beyond me, and that no matter what happens, that this unchanging, unconditional love is always present for me. So even though my beliefs in the church and the dictates of the church or the rules of the church and how my father was understanding them were completely offensive to me, I never lost that relationship to the divine. I never lost that sense of being loved and supported in my life.
And so you would say that you had a crisis in belief rather than a crisis in faith.
Exactly. So that the traumas that I have experienced in my life have never overshadowed that sense of divine love in my life. But definitely I have had many crises of belief. And even as I work towards being a representative and as I work towards ordained ministry, I still struggle, and I find myself on the very liberal, progressive end of the Episcopal Church, and yet I still struggle with a lot of our history, a lot of patriarchal beliefs that still carry through, and just a lot of the tradition just still feels like a weight for me. And even though I can find joy and celebration in the ritual and support, there's still a lot of it that I struggle with. And I consider that to be, and thankfully I had guides in my life who have said that is actually a strength. That is not that having a crisis of belief and having to question and having to work these things out on your own instead of just accepting what others tell you is a strength rather than a weakness. But that's not to say that you won't encounter people who will use that as a guilt and shaming, an area where it can be, there's a lot of black and white thinking in religious structures. It's either all one way or all the other. And so, yes, it's very hard to toe that line and work within an ever-changing belief structure. But for me, again, I can weather all that because my faith is strong, at least in the way that I am defining faith in this instance.
Great answer. Thank you, Stephanie. So this is a good point, I guess, to talk about. Now, you sound like you're involved with a much more open-minded community than many people are. And sometimes, even if the members of your religious or spiritual community are not the ones guilting and shaming you when you have these questions in your faith or your belief, either one, it can be so instilled in us. The guilt and the shame can be so programmed that it can become something that we wrestle with anyway. And I love that you had mentors that told you that was healthy, because it is. But what I wanted to talk to you about, Stephanie, is even if you're not getting shame or guilt pressed upon you from external sources within your community, I think it's pretty common that the guilt and shame come up internally when you find yourself questioning your beliefs or your faiths. And not just your beliefs and faiths in religion, but anything. Again, after Alice died, I kept having this physical sensation that the world had shifted 90 degrees. This was not a mental construct. This was like, I felt this physically. I felt like the world shifted 90 degrees. And sometimes I shifted with it. So I'm standing up on the earth, and when it shifted 90 degrees, I also went 90 degrees. And sometimes it felt like I stayed put, but the world shifted 90 degrees and I was at a right angle to how the world was operating. I am fully aware that this sounds banana pants, but it is absolutely 100% what's true. And that really was the product of deep, really unconscious questioning of everything. But it was a very physical sensation. I wasn't walking around thinking, I question everything. I was way too far gone and deeply in shock. But that questioning, my point is that questioning can be so deeply ingrained. And if you have been brought up in a system where those kind of questions cause guilt or shame, that can become deeply internalized. And so this is a long way of saying, I'd love to talk about what we do, no matter what our religion, no matter what our belief is, whether it's Christianity or Islam or Judaism, or whether we're questioning gravity. What can we do for ourselves when we find ourselves feeling guilty and ashamed of questioning things?
Oh, I wish I had an easy answer for that. I was anticipating that somebody was going to say, how do I fix this? And I was trying to think about what are ways back. And
maybe they don't even need a way back. Maybe
they might not even need a way back. But it's just for me, and I guess the strength of a religious structure is in its rituals, but they don't have to be religious rituals. I find that in combating this feeling of guilt, and you are not wrong, and that these feelings of guilt are deeply internalized. And even if they aren't internalized, you will get them from the world around you. And it's not going to be generally, although for some people, unfortunately, I still think back, there was like this time, and this is decades ago, like these people called into the 700 Club because their child was struggling with deafness. And Pat Robertson, I think it was, told them that they weren't praying hard enough. And I still think back about that.
That makes me mad. That makes me so mad.
Seriously, that's probably 2 decades old, that story. And it still makes me angry. But really is ingrained. It is in the Bible. It is it's in the First Testament or the Old Testament. It is there that really, if anything happened to you that was negative, for centuries, that was your own fault. That was, if you read if you've ever read the book of Job, Job's friends, Job is being punished. It's a very bizarre book of the Bible where essentially God and the devil make a bet on Job, who was faithful. And the devil says, I can make him unfaithful. And God says, no, you can't. He's my most faithful. And they destroy Job. They take away everything from him, all his wealth, all his family. And he is literally sitting there covered in boils, scratching at himself with a piece of broken pottery. And Job's friends, quote unquote friends, you can't see my air quotes around friends, come and tell him, surely he's done something that has brought this situation upon him. And that is all through our history and our religion. And I have had clients ask me in the past, what have they done to deserve this physical condition or this thing? And it breaks my heart that people would think that they have done something so horrible that these events would be put upon them. But it is, even if you weren't raised in a religious structure, we want a reason. We want to question. And unfortunately, the first instinct is that we blame ourselves. We must have done something to bring this about. And it is, even in my head and really in my heart, that's not true. That doesn't mean that those feelings of guilt don't come out. We want to very much reason our way out of these situations, even in the midst of trauma, even in the midst of unbelievable loss, our brains are,
I would say, especially in the midst of trauma, especially in the midst of the inexplicable.
Your brain is working overtime to come up with a core solution that you can act on like right now. And gosh, this is a long way around saying that very much ritual can be your lifeline. And for me, from my specific point of view, just because we have interacted in the body end of the spectrum, if we're talking about mind, body, and spirit, we both share this body-based background, that rituals that involve your body can be, for me, a lifeline, especially as you were describing this feeling of the world being, I'm going to put my own spin on it, like it had been tipped on its axis. Like that the polarity of the whole world had shifted and everything felt physically knocked askew. And I'm not just basing this, I feel like I'm making it up on the fly, but I'm thinking of, I'm going to massacre his name, but I want to say his name is Vander Cook, but I think that's wrong. But he wrote a book called The Body Keeps the Score, which is specifically about how trauma affects the body. And that one of the worst things you can do is to try to sit and meditate and calm yourself, because in situations of trauma, the body just goes straight into survival mode. It goes straight into this problem solving, almost chaotic state of how do we fix this? And the best way out of that, he recommends yoga. I'm a Pilates person, but a very specific movement. And for some people, it's to just go out and run. For some people, it's to do a certain exercise. For some people, it's to build healthy rituals around eating. For some people, it's to literally ground your body, if that makes any sense, to try to almost realign yourself to your physical senses. Because one of the things that trauma does is, as you explained, it completely throws off your physical sense of perception. That is, honestly, Melissa, you said it was like bananas, but it's not. That is a very good way of talking about like how out of ourselves we feel. And one of the ways to reconnect for me personally, again, is nature, is movement, is walk, is finding a way back into your physical self to just reconnect to your physical senses can be a deeply healing process when you have been so thrown out of yourself. Hopefully that makes some sense.
It makes a lot of sense. And it's Vanderkolk. And I added the link into the chat function, which you can find if you would like to add things related. You can find the chat function at the bottom right of the screen. That book should be a Bible, and it should be taught in every school to every human. It's really important information that unfortunately most of us don't find out until the shit hits the fan. And yes, a somatic experience after an earth-shattering event is really key to healing trauma. So I'm so glad that you said that, and how important it is to get out of your head, because trauma hijacks your entire nervous system. It actually changes your brain. That imageable differences in the brain, detectable differences in your brain chemistry. It changes your physiology and your anatomy, and becomes lodged in the body. So yes, I wholeheartedly agree that somatic or body motion can really help. And then in his work, and also Peter Levine is another great person to read about this, Waking the Tiger. He has a few books. Julie, they both talk about the importance of rhythmic moving. So something as simple as having a friend or even a dog roll a ball back and forth, or throw the ball back and forth, or swinging, thing that has like a swaying rhythmic motion can be very helpful. I found swimming extremely healing to this day. There's little, like if I can tell that I'm starting to become activated in PTSD triggers, I go get in a pool, and I don't swim for number of laps. I don't swim for numbers. I don't swim for number of minutes. I don't swim for number of laps. I don't make numbers any part of it. I get it all out of my head. I rhythmically move my body in the water without thinking about it, and it makes a huge difference. Plus, with water places pressure on the body. Water is like 14 times the air. So that pressure on the skin also provides something that's soothing to your sensory system, which is also really great for trauma. This is why weighted blankets and that kind of stuff can work. So yeah, I'm so glad that you brought that up, Stephanie. And Diana has had her hand up, so I'm going to let Diana go ahead and jump in and ask a question. Welcome, Diana.
Thank you. More than a question, I think it's allow me, if you will, to pontificate from my own belief system, and that is spirituality. I'm a cradle Catholic. So everything that I've learned about in spirituality, I have compared against Christianity. In particular, the Christ part of Christianity. I focus mostly on the New Testament and what Jesus said. The thing that gets me is that the reason when I put my hand up initially was because I heard guilt and belief systems that spend guilt as part of the belief system. And it just never seems like that should be the case, because no matter what our belief system is, invariably the message starts with love and ends with love. And guilt is not tough love. It's just not. We should love not only all others, but ourselves. So where does guilt fit into that? And I think that if anybody ever wants to or starts to examine that feeling or starts to have that feeling, if it's not of love, then you don't deserve it. No one deserves it. What we all need to do is love both ourselves and then everyone around us. I just experienced a loss. My mother passed early Monday morning. And we're going through all of that right now. But the one thing, because I've started into this path of spirituality, has kept me deeper, actually, in it more than not. One of the things that I wanted to mention based on what you just said was the swimming thing. Do you not believe that also actually sort of takes you back to the start? It's like a reboot, because that's almost like being in the womb, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. It's totally like the womb. And that wasn't lost on me. And I agree, Diana. Guilt and shame should never be part of religion or spirituality, but it has been for thousands of years, unfortunately. And I believe that it started happening that way because it's a great way to control people. I think before religion was used as a form of social control, the world was probably a better place, and there was probably not a lot of guilt and shame. But it has been that way for a couple thousand years. And so even if it isn't fully instilled in us, there is a way that is carried collectively through the generations. PTSD can be genetic. You can give it to your kid even if they didn't live through what you lived through. And that happens with some of these institutionalized, the darker side of what's going on in some religions. And I love what you said. It's so important.
It's completely, guilt is definitely a control mechanism. You think about the joke of like that mother that uses guilt to get their kids to do things or behave a certain way. And it's a joke and everything, but I get where guilt is actually just it's not part of love. And to go into just the Christian aspect of it, one of the things when Christ was asked, what is the most important commandment? And he said, love God with all your heart, mind, body, and soul. Love your neighbor as you love yourself. And this is the key part right here. The entire law and all the prophets are based on that. Now, love is the action word in both of those. Love is the important thing. So when we go into love, And that's just from Christ's standpoint, but there are the other belief systems that still say the same thing. So when we go into love and stack up everything against it, what we're feeling, with what we're thinking, when we interact with other people in that assessment that we might make or what have you, is that assessment of love. I think about the ones that we call disharmonious or discordant people that are in like politics or whatever. When I think about anybody that goes into those type of conversations and wants to be argumentative, I'm like, oh, bless your heart. You're like a puppy that peed on the carpet. You didn't know any better. I'm going to pat you on the head, clean up your mess, and I'm going to love you still. You may continue in this pattern that you're having. However, it's not going to affect me, and it should not affect anybody that lives in the idea and ideal of being love. And that's to walk in love, to be in, as, for, from, of, every preposition you could think of, love.
Amen. As it should be. And I'm glad that you found your place there. If anyone else has a question or a comment or something that they would like to share about crisis in faith or crisis in belief, go ahead and request the mic and we'll bring you up. Dr. A?
I found what Stephanie said about likening the energy or the belief or faith, I can't remember which one she said it was now, to the Force in Star Wars. Because I do feel a connection to the universe. Now, I didn't feel that when I was little and had very traumatic things happen to me. And when I was younger and had a miscarriage at 5 months, I certainly didn't feel that I felt totally disconnected. So I didn't, okay, please don't anybody go crazy in here, but I didn't believe in God from the time I was very small. I didn't believe in organized religion or any of that. But it wasn't until I was older that I realized I felt disconnected from the entire world, from the whole universe and the energy in it. And then I had to make my way back to feeling that energy. So I really liked the way she compared it to the Force in Star Wars. Even though I'm not a huge Star Wars fan, I know what she's talking about. And when I was older, I think the healing didn't start until after I was in therapy, after I was doing body work, and then felt reconnected to that, what I call the energy.
Yeah, same for me. I was raised Lutheran, but I had some big questions from a very young age and my questions didn't go over that well. And I was not interested whatsoever in getting in trouble. I had a brother that got in trouble a lot and it didn't look like that much fun to me. I wanted zero part of that. So I was a little surprised when my questions that just seemed like regular questions didn't go well. So I started questioning things quite young and sneaking off the library and to figure out like, what's so bad about the Jews? My friend is Jewish. She seems fine. What's so bad about these people? What's so bad about Catholics? I didn't really get it. It all seemed to me then as a 7-year-old, as today, we're all going for the same thing. We're calling it a different name and maybe we should stop killing each other over it. I don't know. It's just an idea. But so I had questions that's a whole nother, I could do a whole series of spaces on that. But one thing, so when my daughter died, I didn't have a specific faith or belief system, but somewhat of a secret passion and hobby of mine to study comparative religion and other philosophies. It's what I do in my spare time. It's how I unwind. And I absolutely understand this makes me sound like a geek, but I can't help it. It's just how I am. I get a lot out of it. And I found that search deepened after my daughter died. And the search, because I had already been doing it for so long, for my whole life, really, it didn't feel frantic. It didn't feel like I need to find an answer in this text. Just the act of doing it, I felt relief from almost nothing at that point. Water and searching various religious and philosophical texts was the only thing that brought any relief. And I thought, I don't really know what I'm doing this. I don't even really know that I have an order. I don't really have a game plan. in this, but the act of doing it is bringing me some relief. It didn't make me solidify any views. I still very much feel like a mutt, and I'm okay with that. But the act of exploring those areas I found very helpful. And I felt no need to grab onto one and make it fit me in that moment. And so I just wanted people to know in general that it's okay to question beliefs from anything from gravity to religion. It's okay to question it. And you might find that it actually feels like an exhale, which is what it felt like for me at a time when nothing felt like that. And it's okay if it brings up feelings of grief or shame. It's probably going to, because it's so instilled in us. But don't let the guilt and shame win, is what I hope people get from this today. Don't let them win. That story isn't your story. That story was planted there by some people that you maybe didn't even meet, that's been there for millennia and doesn't have your best interest at heart. So it's okay to question these things. It's okay to want to have discussions about it in an open, non-judgmental forum. And there are people out there who will sit with you in that space. Don't you think, Diana?
I do. Why would anybody want to sleepwalk through their belief system? This is something that is very much a big part of our nature and who we are. When somebody claims that this is my belief system, does that mean you're going to go through it robotically and not pay attention? Because questioning means that you're paying attention. You're asking things you want to know and understand. And sometimes it may lead to a deeper understanding of the belief system you're in. Sometimes it might lead you to another one entirely. But why not? That means that you're active. You're listening. You're paying attention and you are conscious and present in it. You're not just robotically playing by the rules. Because that's not truly believing. That's not a true faith, is it? That is sleepwalking. You're not there. You're not conscious in it. And one of the things other that I wanted to say, if you don't mind me saying again, what has helped me, because we were coming up to my mother's death for a little bit. And one of the things I kept going through with this process was that I was able to look at her differently. Because spiritually speaking, we are all siblings more than anything. Even if you are the mother who has lost a child, that child is still your sibling, spiritually speaking, because we aren't mother and child when we get to the other side. We aren't anything other than equals in spirit, because we all have the one creator, the one source for it all. And that helped me in a large capacity. And I don't know if it would help with anyone else's, but to take my mother, because two of the people that are hardest to lose is a child and a mother and everything, especially when that's your last parent and everything, no matter what age you are. But the thing is that I've been taking her down off that parental pedestal for a while and seeing her as my sister spirit. And it just makes it easier if that resonates or helps anyone that ever has to deal with grief. And the same with a child. That child had their own path, their own spiritual path, because they go on long before and long after this life. And they have, and so have we. And so in that capacity, it's almost easier to take. It doesn't mean you love them less. It's just easier to understand that how it's going. And boy, when you get to the other side, the rapture of love. I've met people who have died and come back. And the thing they could say, every one of them, is that you feel so overwhelmed with love. And to think about the fact that this person that you've loved in this life is in that is a wonderful way. Every time I start to think about my mother in the last few hours of her life, because I sat with her through her death, every time I think about it, I still think about the fact that, boy, what she's swimming in. I can't wait to join her there.
Thank you so much, Diana, for sharing that. I really appreciate it. So we were just talking about what you can do to self-soothe when you find yourself in a place where you're questioning everything, perhaps even physics. And we talked about swimming. We talked about rhythmic motion. We talked about the somatic aspects like you were talking about, and then Diana had to add to looking at the departed as a sibling instead of the mother or the child.
Yeah. And I think we've talked recently about how it sounds morose, but I'm a great lover of funeral services. For me, and we've talked about this a lot, is it's not okay in our society to mourn and to feel grief. It is very much, people will treat you as if you have a communicable disease. They will treat you as if you are contagious if you are grieving, and will expect you to get over that grief as quickly as possible with no inconvenience and no time for them to feel. They don't want to be tainted by your grief. And that for me, every funeral I go to, I mourn everyone that I've lost, because I feel like it's one of the only times that it's considered acceptable for us to actually think back and have these feelings. And that's my personal preference. But one of the important things, which sort of ties into what Diana was saying, is one of the most important parts for me is the commendation, which is a moment certainly in the Episcopal. I believe it is also in the Catholic and probably in many other areas of Christianity. And I'm sure it is not just in Christianity, but there is a part of the funeral service called the commendation where, the line is, Father, into your hands I commend the spirit. So it is this moment of giving your loved one, as Diana was saying, back into this place of divine love. Yes, it is a moment where we are letting go of our worldly experiences with them, but we are giving over. We're saying, okay, we know that this person is now in a place where they are loved and valued and trusted as the unique spirit, the unique being that they are. And for me to hear those words is the most important part, is to know that this person that I loved has now, as Diana was putting it, and I'm paraphrasing Diana, but going into this soup of love. Soup is such a religious term, but just this new place that is just full of all good things.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. I see we have 2 questions. Mr. JB.
I wanted to just talk to Diana for a moment. I've known her for a while. She is to be commended and applauded for what she's done with taking care of her mother. I first met Diana back in Writer's Circle, and I'll be brief. I understand what you've gone through. I lost my wife and son 22 years ago. As men, we're not allowed to grieve because the stigma is attached to us grieving. We have to put it down and deal with it. And I just want to say to you, Diana, that you're magnificent. And lastly and quickly, I just want to let everybody in this room, in this space, know that these holidays are upon us, where everybody wants you to be festive and happy and joyful. And not all of us can do that because we are dealing with long trauma, and we can't just turn on the happiness because the calendar says we should do this. So I want people in this space to know it's perfectly okay not to be happy and festive during these holidays. Don't try to be something you're not. Be true to yourself.
Amen.
In that vein, and I am not going to push anyone towards this, but last night I attended what's called a Blue Christmas Spirit, which, just as JB was saying, is specifically designed for people who are not feeling festive during the holiday season. And it is a place for just healing. Usually they're candlelit. And if you are looking for ways to reach out, you can look for a Blue Christmas service, which might be helpful to some people.
That's a wonderful suggestion. Thank you so much, Stephanie. Stephanie, I wonder if you had any parting words you wanted to leave us with before we wrap up this space?
I don't know if I have any parting words of wisdom, but in thinking last night of the sermon from last night's service, the reading was talking about how if you're grieving and lost, that you need to reach out to others, that you need to be in community. And the preacher was relating this to a game of hide and seek, and how when we are small children, we love to be found when we're playing hide and seek, and how as we age, we just hide more and more. And that at the times when it's most difficult, we tend to hide ourselves. So I commend all of you for being in this space and looking for ways to connect. And I just encourage you, whether you do it in a religious community or in communities like this, to just keep connected, because we're pack animals as humans, and the only way through healing is with each other. So I encourage everyone to keep reaching out and not to hide yourselves.
Oh, I love that, Stephanie. Those are beautiful parting words. Thank you so much for joining us today, Stephanie. And always thank you to Dr. A, who is my brain on the back end of this whole operation. I couldn't do it without her. Thank you for Diana and Mr. JB for your participation today. Thank you to everyone who's here now and listening to the replay or the podcast. I'm glad that you spent this time with us. It means a lot to me. There are some resources in the chat. If you click on the chat, we'll always stay with this link now. And yes, the holidays are not always for everyone. I'll be doing a couple of more shows this year before the end of the year to provide some community for those of you who might not be feeling so merry. May you all go forward in your day with gentleness and peace. Thank you again, Stephanie, Dr. A, Diana, Mr. JB, and to everyone else. Big love. Thank you for joining us today. For more information on the show or my other work, you can check out thisclubsucks.com or melissamariemonroe.com, or you can find me on Twitter at @MMeaning. May you experience some gentleness on your path today.